A plus stain maker? Try Tide. It's boosted. Regular detergent can't match Tide's boosted clean.
Yeah.
It's cleaner, whiter, brighter, and fresher. It's got to be Tide.
It's your essence, but my confession, it's like you said. So good morning. Happy November to everyone. And I'd just like to say welcome to our new podcast that we're going to be running for the next few months. I hope that everyone is ready for this powerful message, and we're going to try to do it in the right format, in the right order. My name is Maurice Bill Street, and I'll be your host this afternoon. So, we hope that you enjoy everything. Please like, share, and send us some of your feedbacks. And we're going to start off with prayer and the scripture. And we're going to ask that everyone would get in and share this with us. Amen. Amen. So, I'm going to read a little message from Psalms 112 this morning because this is going to be our blueprint for today. And it goes like this. It says, "Blessed is the man who fears the great I am, who finds great delight in his commands. His children will be mighty in the land. The generation of the upright will be blessed. Wealth and riches are in his house, and his righteousness endures forever." So, over the years, we have been struggling to gain generational wealth. And mainly, it's just been a lack of education, a lack of understanding, a lack of purpose in what's been going on, even in America. And today we can see the fall of Congress, where Congress is collapsing. Both parties is at blame. And why do I say both parties are to blame for the current situation that we're in? Is because we've seen the witness of the killing of innocent people in Israel, in the Gaza Strip. But both parties has supported Israel through Congress. Even the Biden, Kamala Harris supported the guns and supplied Israel with money during this time. Now, on the other hand, even though we elected in the new administration, which is Trump administration, the Republicans, we knew where Trump stood in his first term because he actually made Israel the capital and moved the embassy, the American embassy, to Israel. So we knew that where he was going, but we didn't see this all coming to where as though they was actually benefiting the rich so that the rich could do what they're doing. So what we're going to do is that I'm going to introduce you to a film about Malcolm X and let you listen to this film for a little while as we progress through our video this morning. And I want you to hear some of the things that happened and was spoken about in the days of Malcolm X. Okay? All right. So hang on here with me for a few minutes. I'm going to make a few adjustments. And we're going to actually go here. We're going to go here. And then we're going to go here. And this is going to actually tell you a little bit about what's been happening to us in America.
I saw Kamala Harris once again yelling at protesters during this book tour. A more recent one that was in D.C. You know, she's on this tour for her book. And I had to stop and think, how did we get here, right? And sometimes to figure out how we got here, you really kind of got to go back and look through history a little bit. And one person that I've looked at quite a bit is Malcolm X. You see, I think it's important to understand that the way that you get to Kamala Harris or Barack Obama downplaying the suffering of the Palestinian people, capitulating with the oppression and the occupation, even prior to October 7th. The way that you get there is because of what Malcolm X warned us about a long time ago. Malcolm X gave a stern warning of what was starting and what was to come if people didn't wake up. And unfortunately, we moved away from Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, Assata Shakur, the revolutionary leaders back in that day. And we started to embrace something called neoliberalism. And contrary to what people may believe, neoliberalism doesn't mean that you are liberal. Neoliberalism applies to both parties. And neoliberalism, in my opinion, is what paved the way for the genocide in Gaza, the Kamala Harrises of the country, the Barack Obamas, and I'll show you how. Malcolm X said this long ago. I want everyone to hear what he says. Pay close attention.
Many whites who are trying to solve the problem, but you never see them going under the label of liberal. That white person that you see calling himself a liberal is the most dangerous thing in the entire Western Hemisphere. He's the most deceitful. He's like a fox. And a fox is always more dangerous in the forest than the wolf. You can see the wolf coming. You know what he's up to. But the fox will fool you. He comes at you with his mouth shaped in such a way that even though you see his teeth, you think he's smiling. You take him for a friend.
You will take him for a friend. You see, before people started to focus so much on we got to support and vote for the Democratic Party, there were people that you look up to try to get these things accomplished outside of electoral politics, like a Fred Hampton, like a Malcolm X. Malcolm X understood that politically was not the way to go, that focusing on the liberal politics or the conservative politics was ultimately not going to lead to equality and was not going to lead to any sort of liberation for Black people in this country. Now, he goes on to explain this in a little bit more detail because I want people to understand how we got a Kamala Harris, how we got a genocide, how we got journalists making an excuse for a genocide. This is all connected. These are separate. We are not separating domestic and geopolitics. I'm going to explain to you because what happens abroad, right? That empire, it comes back home. Listen to this.
I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chopped on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly. And therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chopped.
This part is important. So if he's describing the two between like the liberals and the conservatives, you know, for obviously for Black people, with the conservative party, it's easier to see that, right? Because it's out in the open. They are very like upfront about what they believe, etc. But with the Democrats, they're sneaky. Just like he said. Now, this deep dive isn't done to tell you to go join the Republican Party. Because what Malcolm X realized is that both were a problem and were going to be a hurdle when it came to equality and Black liberation. And so with the Democrats, with the white liberals, and this ain't to say all of them, but a lot of times they feel as though they are the answer to your problems. They are really good at saying that they approve or they tolerate certain social issues. But that doesn't mean they want it in their backyard. They're the first to say that they support Black Lives Matter, and they'll put a sign in the window to let you know. They're the first to say that I support equal marriage rights for everybody. They're the first to say all of these things. But they're also the first to call the cops on you when you try to move into their neighborhood next door to them. You see, they're okay with you doing those things. They just don't want it next to them. That's a different type. That is the sneakiness that he's talking about. They may not necessarily walk around and call you the N-word to your face. No, they'll just work behind the scenes structurally to make sure that your kids don't go to the schools that their kids go to. They'll work behind the scenes with lawmakers to make sure that the property taxes actually do mean something, damn it. And unless you live in their neighborhood where they have wealthy homes, your kids aren't going to get that same type of quality education. I've seen it firsthand. And for those of us that do live in blue or progressive cities, we'll be the first to let you know how these things really go down. That's the sneaky part. Listen to the rest.
His place. I'd like to point out, though, that I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberals, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
Did everybody hear that? They pose as the friend, but their appetite is the same. Their methods and their mannerisms are different. Why is this important when we're talking about how you get the Kamala Harrises, how you end up with the Barack Obamas, how you end up with Black politicians excusing a genocide? After Malcolm X was killed, after Fred Hampton was killed, after Assata Shakur ran away to Cuba, and she was innocent, by the way, that opened the door to neoliberalism. Because without those revolutionary leaders, then the other question was, okay, well, what do we do now? Well, there's always politics. Just put your hope in a politician. This is the issue with neoliberalism. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Neoliberalism and race. Shout out to Derek Hamilton for this. And then we're going to get into who actually started neoliberalism, because believe it or not, it's not Ronald Reagan. He popularized it, but didn't start it. Check this out. Start right about here. Here we go. For the last 45 years, essentially all of the economic gains from America's increasing productivity has gone to the elite and upper middle class, while workers' real wages have remained roughly flat. In their report in 1973, this is coming from the Economic Policy Institute, 1973 serves as the line. Prior to that date, worker gains in terms of real wages increased with an almost lockstep one-to-one relationship with productivity. However, after 1973, despite the continued trend of increased productivity, the promise trickled down to all workers from neoliberal supply-side economics hasn't stopped. This neoliberal political ideology has dominated maintaining and reinforcing economic concentration. To understand why the status quo of growing inequality persisted, we need to look at the third pillar of this relationship, which is race, or more broadly, the existence of an underclass marked by a socially stigmatized identity. This rose in the 1970s. Neoliberal economics made it implicit, or sometimes explicit, promise to Black Americans and to the underclass that the rising tide would lift all boats, and that the new paradigm would free them from the state's deadening hand that forced them into lives of dependency. Now, let's go back to this part right here. The rising tide would lift all boats. Don't you hear that today? Doesn't that sound a little bit familiar? I told you guys before multiple times, I support the universal program. There are other things that need to be done. Because even with like a Bernie Sanders, when he says these universal programs are going to lift all boats, yeah, it's true. It lifts everybody, but it doesn't put everybody on equal footing because someone is still going to be on the bottom. That's the problem when you just focus on the universal policies. If you're at the bottom right now and other people are ahead of you, $100, everybody is lifted, but you're still at the bottom because you had less than everybody else to begin with. Let's go on a little bit more. This piece right here, the promise of economic prosperity and relative racial progress of neoliberal economics for Black Americans has not materialized. In fact, some progress has been reversed. Evidence from the U.S. decennial census reveals tremendous relative racial economic progress for Blacks from 1940, when the typical Black man earned only 45% of a typical white male's earnings, to the 1980 census, when that gap was reduced to about 70% of average white male wages. But this relative progress ceased. Prevailing neoliberal explanations for this reversal have focused on education, individual attitudes, and public sector programs that supposedly generate perverse incentives away from the personal responsibility. The presumption is that if Black people were more responsible, made better financial decisions, and focused on education, they could get a good job and achieve economic security. But studying and working hard hasn't been enough for Black Americans. So let's pause here for just a second. Neoliberalism is to blame for inequality. This is the part I think some people don't want to reckon with. Neoliberalism is to blame for inequality in this country. There was a time in this country where I think it was the period after Reconstruction, where Black people were doing pretty well. And that was because the dollar continued to turn within the Black community. We had Black Wall Streets in this country. There were multiple ones, not just in Tulsa, and they were all burned to the ground. So you see, the things that people like Malcolm X and Fred Hampton and them were fighting for, they weren't just fighting for, okay, we need to have we need to be able to have a seat at the table. There needs to be equality across the board. They were also fighting for this type of economic stability, which did not exist at that point in time. Stay with me here and I'll explain to you how this leads to a Kamala Harris and what you see happening right now with Gaza. Because you see, as we go on, a lot of people, they credit Ronald Reagan as the father of neoliberalism. He made it popular along with Margaret Thatcher, but it didn't start under him. Let's get into this piece here. Neoliberalism policies associated with Reaganomics actually started with Carter. That's Jimmy Carter, and he did not win re-election, right? Check this out. Research has long established strong links between neoliberal policies and increasing rates of inequality. See, here we go again with the inequality, right? So historian David N. Gibbs, he's the author of The Revolt of the Rich, says we mustn't whitewash President Carter's record. And Chris Hedges also talked about this with Jimmy Carter. It goes on to say here, Susan George, for instance, argued quite convincingly that increasing inequality stems from the neoliberal practices of placing public wealth into private hands, enforcing huge tax cuts for the rich, and suppressing the wages for average workers. Let's go down here. Moreover, the study in question argues that the culprit for the impact on attitudes is Thatcherism, right? So they're relating this to Margaret Thatcher. Indeed, most researchers place the origin of the neoliberal counter-revolution in the post-war era with the policies initiated by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the UK and the US, respectively. However, this book here by David Gibbs, he goes on to say that we should look to the administrations of Richard Nixon and Jimmy Carter in particular for setting up the foundations for the launching of the neoliberal counter-revolution in the United States. So this is where I think some people get that wrong. They pretend that, they tend to go on and say that Reagan was the one who started it. This actually started a little bit under Nixon, more so under Carter, and then Reagan escalated it. If you look here, this is what the interviewer was asking David Gibbs.
Things happened here. No one really talks about it.
What exactly are we looking for? Something that was buried in dirt for a long time.
So, as you can see, we have the blueprint already from our ancestors, Malcolm X, even Dr. King. Even though Dr. King's theory was the nonviolent, at one time they thought the Malcolm X theory was a little bit more violent because Malcolm X was actually telling the black folks to defend yourself. If someone hit you, hit them back. He was actually just referring to defending yourself, as you can, and see now and today. So look at many things that have been destroyed, even when we go to the scripture, how they have taken certain content and has changed it around. So that the black people won't inherit the generational wealth, who will always stay below the level of poverty. So this is why I'm bringing this to you, because I feel like here in 2025, we need to get started with some unity here. We need to start a new party. We need to start some organization. Just like you've seen the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which was so similar to Dr. King, so similar to John F. Kennedy, correct? So these are patterns. And if you notice, they reflect on each other. That's how we can relate. The mysterious, the magic bullet and all this nonsense, conspiracy theory. But you can see that Charlie Kirk was spewing out so much rhetoric at one time, and even though he had some good talking points, there was also some bad talking points that was also affecting the situation. And then it got to the point where Israel was just killing all of the people in Gaza Strip. And you have to have a heart. If you are any type of spiritual person, you know that what it do is saying the commandment, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. But as you see, we cannot support. You can't be on both sides of the coin. And this is where we have so much controversy, because either your yay is going to be yay or your nay is going to be nay. But you got to stand up on what side of the coin you're going to be on. And as you see, there's no one that really you can't say that you're going to go under all of these political laws and rhetoric and be successful. It's just not possible, and we see that it's not possible. and why I said that this video is named The Return of the Cushites, because actually the Cushite people was actually part of the 25th dynasty back in Egypt. So actually they came before the Israelites. And what did they do? They was into development, landscaping. They knew mathematics, and we need to connect our natural gifts that we naturally have and go back to the natural inspiration that we get through the Holy Spirit that is referred to as a God-given gift. So if we live under these practices, we can actually even be better than the Israelites. We was here before the Israelites. Who helped Jeremiah the prophet? It was a Cushite. Who did Moses marry? He married a Cushite woman. So you can see that the Cushite people had certain points, biblical points, in the whole scenario of the generational aspect of life, and especially for colored folks. God has a way of designing things so that the least person that you expect will be the most important person in the message. And we're going to continue on with the video here. I'm going to read something from Psalms 10 real quick, because this is going to be our goal as we go forward in 2025. And I believe we can do this. We need to establish new chapters of Black organization. Remember remember the Black Panther Party?
DUIs in the last 5
Well,
years.
we're going to get into more of this.
I was an
Okay.
insurance agent for
The
Okay.
revolt of the rich, you argue that it was actually the Nixon administration that laid the groundwork for the shift to a conservative economic platform, and that it was the Carter administration, in turn, that ushered in the first wave of neoliberalism. So he asked him to explain a little bit. David Gibbs comes in and says, Richard Nixon aspired to be a transformational president, one who would overturn the regulated capitalism inherited from the New Deal in favor of a free market revolution. He was influenced by laissez-faire worldview of the University of Chicago economist Milton Friedman. Goes on to say here, to amplify Friedman's message, Nixon relied on a rightist intellectual network focused on the American Enterprise Institute, a free market bastion. The president leaned on corporate executives to increase their funding of AEI, building it up as a Washington powerhouse. At the same time, the Brookings Institute here, at the same time, the president encouraged executives to defund the centrist Brookings Institute and other rivals to the rising of AEI. Jump forward here. Corporate America would engage in massive influence campaign throughout the 1970s after Watergate, using a dense network of think tanks, lobby groups, and publicity agencies to spread their message. There's something else I gotta mention that happened around this time too. One of the things that Richard Nixon promised was to end the war in Vietnam. Does this sound a little bit familiar with what we're dealing with today? So under Nixon in come the think tanks. We get into Carter. Carter accelerates neoliberalism. And then, of course, you get to Ronald Reagan, who pushes the trickle-down economics and says that this is going to be the way. All the wealth is going to be at the top, but don't worry, it's going to trickle down to the American people, to the working class, which did not happen. The point that I'm trying to make is this. When those revolutionary leaders were killed, particularly within the Black community and Black working class, the next thing to look forward to was neoliberalism. This idea that voting was going to solve the problem. This idea that, we just got to adopt to Reaganomics because Ronald Reagan says all this is going to trickle down to us. And with Fred Hampton gone and with Malcolm X gone, there was no one there to tell you, no, we need to focus on building things outside of this and not get caught up in just hoping and wishing that a politician is going to save us. And because those revolutionary leaders were killed, other members of the community were less willing to step up because they didn't want to be killed. That was how the FBI, the CIA were able to stop and silence the movement on the outside. When you have a presidential candidate, that is running and says they're going to stop the war, they're going to make things right, then they get in, not trying to stop the war. We're talking about the war in Vietnam. And people still struggle economically, probably not as much as they're struggling today. It opens the door for what we have now. Because we didn't have that real opposition. There were protests against the Vietnam War, don't get me wrong. But all the revolutionary leaders, by the time they were all killed off, you didn't have those leaders within the community to say, no, we're going to organize this way. We're not going to buy into the trickle-down economics, and this is how we're going to save our communities and protect our communities. You didn't have that. So when a politician came along and said, just believe in me, have hope in me, that's what people did. When in reality, if people go back and listen to what Malcolm X said, he was right. He warned you way ahead of time that both of those parties, in particular for the Black working class, was not going to for the community. Because I believe that Malcolm X knew what was coming. And I think some people forgot about that. Ayoka says, Kwame, you warned us as well. There you go. Right? So if we look forward, and we can see this as well. Let me add this part here before we get to the Kamala piece. This is under the Carter presidency, right? We're talking about the Committee on Present Danger. So listen to this. The 1970s produced an elite campaign aimed at increasing military spending and reinvigorating U.S. militarism after its failures in Vietnam. Did everybody hear what I just said? After the failures in Vietnam, they didn't say, let's pull back on the wars. Let's pull back on the defense spending. They said, let's increase military spending. So I point this out again. If after seeing women and children being killed on national television during the Vietnam War, if that didn't stop the madness, we were only destined for what was going to happen today. Because that didn't make the government say, we're not going to put more money into wars. We're not going to increase defense spending. They did the exact opposite. Neoliberalism pushed all that. And because they got away with it, and they increased defense spending, and they continued the wars after everything that people saw was happening in Vietnam, because they got away with it, that's how you get a genocide in Gaza. When people look back and they say they don't understand how people can support what Israel is doing, how people have no sympathy, no feeling for the Palestinian people, if you look back at what I just told you, how there were Americans who were dying in Vietnam, Americans who were drafted against their will to go fight this war the U.S. should have never been in the first damn place. And they were killed. All these caskets coming back to the United States. If the U.S. government was willing to turn a blind eye to the killing and the death of the Americans that were drafted to go fight that war, what makes you think they weren't going to turn a blind eye to a genocide in Gaza? Once they got away with that, what we saw coming in Gaza was only inevitable at some point. If it didn't happen in Gaza, it would have happened somewhere else. So that part there is important for people to see about the defense spending. And that is how you get to a Kamala Harris. You see, Kamala Harris is pissed because she doesn't understand. She's having this book tour, and everywhere she goes, she's getting called out in the audience because she didn't want to withhold arms from Israel that she said herself. Now, this wasn't Code Pink. This was the climate defiance. They support the Democratic Party. Look at what they say to Kamala Harris here.
They'll figure it out who you are soon enough.
Kamala Harris, you are a right-wing war criminal! You are a right-wing... You fucking genocide! Shame on you! This is all your fault! This is your fault! We have Trump because this is your fault!
Something I want to point out, and that young woman is incredibly correct. I want to show you the attitude that Kamala Harris gives here. Watch this. You see this? This attitude that she has here? Let me explain why you have this, right? It's the same reason why Kamala Harris stood up and said, I am speaking to people asking about a genocide. You get this cocky, you get this ego, because neoliberalism has allowed someone like you to be there in the first damn place. Let me make it very clear. What Malcolm X said was right. They pick people like Kamala Harris. They pick people like Barack Obama. White liberals pick these people and put them in front of the black community. He was correct. And they tell you, this is who you are going to support. This is the person that you need to get behind. Who is the exact opposite of Malcolm X? The exact opposite of Fred Hampton. This is not what they told you to do. But that's what the empire wants. She has this attitude because she was selected. She was selected by think tanks, by the Clintons, by white liberals who said, she'll be the one. And she has this attitude because she believes that because she is a black woman, we are supposed to support her. Let me make it very clear. You can't have it both ways. You cannot sit around, some of you walking around and you like, I supported Assata Shakur. Free Assata Shakur, and she's passed away now. But you can't be like, rah, rah, Malcolm X and rah, rah, Kamala Harris. She's the exact opposite. She is what Malcolm X warned you about. And without the death of Malcolm X, without the death of the revolutionary leaders, we don't walk into neoliberalism. We keep organizing within our communities. We don't trust the politician who comes in with the switchy-witchy words and the code switching to make they think they down with you, who's never walked in your shoes. You don't get someone who just thinks they deserve it just because they're black. And you're black. And so you got to support them. That's how you get that. Without the death of Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, without the fleeing of Assata Shakur, without the death, I'd say MLK, but these people are a little bit more, they're a little bit more further out there than MLK. But even with MLK, without them, we don't go to neoliberalism. We don't count on it. We don't embrace it. Because the moment we entered neoliberalism, the organizing stopped. And that's exactly what they wanted. why she got a problem. She can't take it that people are confronting her. This is how you get a comment where this woman compares deportation to genocide.
I'm not president. And if you want to talk about legacy, let's talk about the legacy of mass deportation of people not voting and Donald Trump.
You see, I'm not president. No, you're not. And you know why? Why is she not president? Partially because of this issue. Because her not willing to withhold weapons to Israel. So you see, neoliberalism led the way to inequality. Neoliberalism did that. Supported by both sides. Neoliberalism is not just a liberal thing, supported by both sides. This idea that we're going to focus on the wealthy and not the working class. And even within that working class, you have Black people that are even further at the bottom. So when people don't understand, how do you get to this point with Kamala Harris or the statement made by Barack Obama? How do you get to this point where you have basically they are puppets that have been put in front of the Black community? They were selected by white liberals, put in front of you and say, you better support this person. How do you get to this point where this person who prided herself to be a Black woman, at least when she was running, not having that type of empathy and sympathy for the Palestinian people, lying about what Israel really was, backing an oppressor, backing a state that is occupying a group of people? How do you get to that point? Get to that point because neoliberalism made inequality okay. When people...
So I'm going to stop it right there and pause the video. But I want you to like and share this video, please. I want us to read Psalms 110 and before I end the video. And it says here, it says, the great I am says to my people, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. This is what he's talking about. These messages and lessons that we have learned from our ancestors is telling us to be still. Don't over anticipate anything, and especially with this Trump administration, because that's what he wants you to do. He wants to have an all-out war in the streets and in the cities of the United States so that he can call out the National Guard, so he can bring in the Marines, okay, to shut everything down and to control everything, because he wants to show that we have no moral justice. You know, we have no one fighting for us, but we know that the great I am is our savior, and he's fighting for us daily. But he also says, you know, be humble, okay? And we can share in each other's burden that we're going through. It's just like the people in Jamaica just went through Hurricane Melissa. If you can help. If you even have a cruise line, and I have asked Carnival Cruise Line to put a ship off the coast and let the people from Jamaica come out, at least take hot showers, get a decent meal, you know, have some medical attention, and to put them in a better atmosphere while their homes and land is being reconstructed. And as much money as Carnival Cruise Line make from the tourist business, I mean, come on, you still had 25,000 people that were stuck and stranded in the hurricane while Melissa was going through Jamaica. That's an awful lot of people. And you know how much money that is when you go to look at the tourist business, and look how much money the cruise line services was going to lose because Jamaica has been totally destroyed. Okay? So, as we look at Psalms 10 and we starting off the new month of November, we need to say this almost every day. To whereas though he says, your troop will be willing on your day of battle, arrayed in the holy majesty. From the womb of the dawn, you will receive the dew of your youth. And we could go back to the days of our youth, because Dr. King and them was marching during the days of my youth. Malcolm X was giving us these lessons and information when I was a kid, 12, 13 years old. This was back when my youth, and I didn't really understand. I might not understood what was actually going on back then. But look at us now, 60 years later, okay? And both parties of Congress has failed us. So either we need to put new funds, file a new petition for a new party that would be a more of an independent party to go into the White House, okay? Just so that we can have a better balance of equality with the government, because I don't really think there's never going to be equality with us with the law, not as us colored folks goes, because they always look down on us. But they practice these little sneaky things and sneaky situations by being these liberals, like the lady was saying in the video, and Malcolm X was explaining to us. It's like the fox and the wolf. They look right at us, smile in our face, and once they get behind closed doors, they changes everything. And this is what Congress do. They go behind closed doors and they rewrite the law of the land. Also, let me read a little bit more here in Psalms 110. It says, the great I am is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. Okay? So we can allow the great I am to do what he does. Let him do what he's here to do. Because we have what? Little or no control over these things. And now that we done lost our youth, we need all the help that we can get. So daily, I'm asking you as we go forward in the month of November to read Psalms 110. Let us start organizing as a community and help each other out as community members, as people that lives in certain states. And whatever state you live in, communicate with the other Black people in the state next to you, so that everybody will know what's going on. And this is how we can build unity, and we could take control of this back in a meek and humble way, without a lot of killing and violence. So I'd like to say thank you for joining me this afternoon. My name is Maurice Bill Street, and I will be passing more of these messages on. I still have other videos that I'd like to share with you, and I just ask that you stay connected to our podcast here and our new YouTube channel in the future. So have a wonderful and blessed day, and happy November. Thank you.